Welcome to this episode of the Love Procurement Podcast. My name is Kelly Barner, and I'll be your host for this conversation. Today, I'm glad to welcome Pascal Bensoussan, Chief Product Officer at Ivalua, to talk about a really hot topic: why generative AI is changing procurement. So, hi, Pascal, how are you?
Hi, Kelly. Thanks for having me. Doing great.
Absolutely. Glad to have you here to take on sort of the topic of the moment. Now, before we dive into generative AI in reality and in hype, let's learn a little bit more about you. Tell me something about your professional journey that brought you to this point.
Uh, yes, great. So I live in California, in the Bay Area, near San Francisco. I've been in the Bay Area for about 27 years. I came to study in Stanford and then decided to enjoy the innovation pace and the amazing technology that is created here in the Bay Area. I started with Sun Microsystems in supply chain, and then kept going with ad tech during the ad tech boom. Was part of several startups, had interesting good exit for our shareholders. One of them was we were acquired by Microsoft. I didn't stay very long at Microsoft. I wanted to. I'm very much an entrepreneur, and I joined another company to lead product there, and we also got a good acquisition. Then joined a third company in the marketing tech space, which is doing great and working very well. And then finally met one of the founder of Ivalua, who convinced me after a few years to join the company, which was 4.5 years ago. And it was an interesting journey for me because coming from ad tech and marketing tech, where every piece of user interface is very visual, interaction with people are very visual, and you're dealing with marketers and marketing agencies. And it was really a fun solution area to be building great product for. And I considered spend management and procurement, and I was saying to myself, why would I go there? Like it's a lot of forms, it's very bureaucratic. And then I digged a little bit more in my research, and I found that there is since several years there has been a renewal around procurement, very much geared towards intelligence and artificial intelligence in particular. Very strong UX because many people don't necessarily are not really very tech savvy. So it has to be very intuitive and elegant. A lot of collaboration and chat, a lot of mobile capability. So at the end of the day, something that seems to be a very bureaucratic capability that you can make in a fun, engaging, and even sexy kind of capability. So overall, I felt that there was a really good mission for me at Ivalua.
Well, now that we've managed to get our hooks into you, can you tell me something that you love about procurement?
Aha, good question. Well, I think the core of procurement and the way in one of the ways we position Ivalua is to bring really deep insight and discipline and process discipline to the collaboration between a buyer and a supplier, right? And so the collaborative part for me is fascinating. And it's not just about exchanging documents or agreeing on contract terms or collaboration via a messaging interface. It's really how do I reach and extend my company through my strategic suppliers and across a whole set of processes very early on during product design and sourcing and making good decisions on products and components, particularly in the direct space. But throughout the execution of getting parts and material, or even in direct buy and products and services, the engagement with the supplier and the intimate understanding that their success means mine as a buyer, and my success is also tied to theirs, right? And so that collaborative aspect is what I think is the greatest thing that happens within the Ivalua platform.
And anytime there's an opportunity for collaboration, it always means there's also an opportunity for innovation. And that's one of the things that we're going to focus on today. Now, before I get your opinions around how generative AI is changing procurement, I actually want to sort of start at the beginning. How do you describe what generative AI is?
That's a good question. Well, generative AI is a subset of overall artificial intelligence. Within artificial intelligence, you have what's called supervised learning or machine learning, which is where you teach a model, an AI model, to do things that it has never done before because you provided that model a number of examples. And the model itself has an ability to identify patterns and identify specific relationships between things that are probabilistic, and then create a response. The response can be a classification of some sort. It can be a prediction. And in the case of generative AI, it's the ability to create a new text, new form of text. Now, the framework that was put together with generative AI, it's called the GPT models or transformers, is a very generic and super interesting framework because it's a bit of a unifying framework for artificial intelligence, where it's not just text, but it can be sound and recreating sounds. It can be images or videos now of recreating whole videos. And so at the end of the day, sounds, videos, images, text can be all encoded in what's called a token, which is a codification of an image, a language, a vocabulary. And what generative AI is an ability to create new tokens, new images, extend an image, create a new one. And so for that, those models have been trained on billions of documents, pretty much the human knowledge available on the internet, right? And they have, so that's why they need huge machines and a lot of time to be built, to be fine-tuned, a lot of parameters. But then when they run, they're able to take an input, go through their network, their knowledge network, and then define, based on your input, what is the next word that I'm going to put. And every time with the highest quality, the highest probability, to assemble a set of words in a sequence that will make sense. And will, more than make sense, they will look like they've been written by a human.
Now, generative AI, and you mentioned ChatGPT, that specific model, that sort of took the world by storm about a year ago. And I think in a very short order, it didn't matter what you did for a living. Somebody was telling you that your job was going to go away because ChatGPT and AI was going to come and do your job. But I'm curious about your perspective on how it's been applied. To what extent does the hype we hear in general media, parallel or not, the actual evolution and acceptance of generative AI technology in meaningful ways?
Yeah, so I think it came at a right time where people are looking at AI with both awe and maybe a little bit of fear.
Yeah.
If you remember the movie Her, where Theodore, the main character, Joaquin Phoenix, played by Joaquin Phoenix, is falling in love with an AI operating system who seems to be caring for him and allowing him to kind of understand that some kind of external entity is, caring for him and being able to really understand him very deeply, and he's falling in love with that entity. And so I think early on when OpenAI came out with ChatGPT, some experiment was run where even I think a journalist was able, through a series of conversation with ChatGPT, to get ChatGPT to say, "I want to be human," and even said at the end, "Oh, you're my God, I love you," whatever it was. And at the end of the day, we just have to think that those are just words that are assembled one after another with some kind of probabilistic model. There is no conscience. There is little reasoning. In fact, today, GPT models are not great at reasoning. They're getting better and they're being aided by a lot of new techniques. But at the end of the day, that what they do is assemble a set of words. So it's very easy to think that suddenly we're getting to general intelligence, we're getting to consciousness, and that's can create some fear. The,
Yeah.
the other thing that I've noticed is that at some point schools were reluctant to give generative AI or to put
Yes.
generative AI in the hands of students, saying that was kind of unfair. That was they would be tricking the system. They wouldn't learn anymore. And it's funny. I did some research in the 50s, in the 1950s. There were a lot of discussions whether or not calculators should be accepted in the classroom.
Yeah.
And people would say, yeah, if you give them calculators, they're not going to think, they're not going to learn from their errors anymore. And it's just a tool, and it
Yeah.
became a tool. And I think a generative AI is a calculator of words in some sense. And so at the end of the day, we're just giving people a tool. Will it replace people's ability to think? I hope not, because you still need critical thinking. Will they help them accomplish things faster and maybe in some extent with some more depth? Probably.
Yeah. Well, okay, Pascal. First of all, I'm adding Joaquin Phoenix to my imaginary wish list of guests for the Love Procurement podcast. If you can fall in love with an AI, it feels like you should come talk to us about love procurement. But it's interesting because when we think about the impact it can have in the big picture, this was something you and I talked about previously. Because when I ask about how it's changing procurement, you actually took a step back and pointed out that generative AI is most likely to be a company wide type of project. If that's the case, where does it mean, or under what circumstances is procurement likely to encounter it?
So it's really an interesting question, because as we thought about how to embed generative AI in our platform at Ivalua, we realized that as we were doing our research, that the kind of capabilities that we had to put together were very generic in nature. Things like I need to combine internet search with generative AI. Why? Because the knowledge of OpenAI models stops in April of 2023, and if I want to use it to do internet-based market intelligence or data enrichments of supplier profile information, then I need to have the most up-to-date information. So then we started to think about, but I have also my own knowledge. So I need to start feeding my own knowledge, whether it's stored in databases or in documents and files. I need to kind of have my knowledge accessible to a large language model. And then we realized that a large language model's memory, in terms of how much information it can deal with at a given point in time, is limited. And it cannot deal with gigabytes of information. So you have to go and selectively retrieve in a contextually relevant way the knowledge information. So we had to build that. Now, OpenAI is offering all of those services, but in my mind, if I depend on OpenAI for those services, then I'm stuck, in a sense. And I can only offer generative AI capabilities through OpenAI. And we decided at Ivalua, as we went through that effort, that we wanted to remain independent of the large language model technology that we would be using in the far back end. And the reason this is important for a company is that I think many companies will go through the same process. And I think that process of maturing the infrastructure and the technology upstream of the large language model is something that they're going to have to own if they really want to control their destiny, their knowledge, their information, and how it's being used across the company. And so it sits at the CEO level. I think the use of generative AI within a company is first and foremost a CEO mandate because it touches all departments within the company. And then I think the execution of that is going to be owned by the CIO, who is going to own the technology and the infrastructure that's required to make that happen within the company. Now, I'm happy as an expert in generative AI and in sharing our journey to become a trusted advisor for our customers and share with them what we discovered, what works, what doesn't work, and how to bake that vision in not only the overall company objectives or mandate of adopting generative AI, but also how you put that very specifically in the context of a business function like procurement.
And I think one of the things that's challenging for procurement, even if there is a CEO-led, CIO-executed generative AI pilot going on, we almost don't know what we don't know. This is one of those areas where everyone is learning as they go. And so I think for a lot of procurement teams, it can be a bit intimidating. Do you raise your hand? Do you suggest yourself as a use case or a test project? What are the basics at this point that you think it's helpful for procurement teams to know about generative AI?
So it's there's obviously a need to get started at some point, and because if you don't get started now, you might not start in a month from now, in 6 months from now, and then you'll fall behind, because has the potential to be disruptive in the way people can leverage it as a tool to go faster, deeper, and to do more with less. In other words, now to get started, you obviously need a little bit of an inclination to some curiosity, right? You need to be curious. You need to want to be a bit playful, because it takes a bit of iteration to find the right way to engage with a generative AI prompt. Like, the way you ask it is also the way I'm talking to you as a human. But sometimes as humans, we have a lot of signs that helps us align, the way you look, the way you blink, the way you smile, the way you turn your head. And so I know that I may have to clarify some things by just looking at some of the visual cues. I don't have those visual cues when I'm working with a generative AI model. So often it will try to interpret what I'm writing or what I'm saying if there is a vocal aspect, but that's about it. And so learning to be clear and structured in your input is really key and important. And many people will feel that they're not ready or prepared, or might be intimidated. But I think good models are starting now to know when they don't know, and then they ask questions. They try to be a good journalist, a good investigator, a good a moderator, and the model can be taught to not necessarily assume they have understood and give you an answer that will be completely off.
Yeah.
But if they're not sure, ask you a question. And so there's ways to get a little bit to make the transition or the starting a little bit easier.
Now, some of this is speculation because it's still early days, as we've said. But if we start to think about how generative AI's capabilities might change procurement, I think, and I'm sure my audience will be right with me on this, we can think about it in two different ways because there's so much procurement is responsible for. So even if we really simplify it down to two things, there's procurement's tactical or transactional work, and then there's the more visionary, strategic work. Let's think about each of those in turn. Starting with the tactical things, how might generative AI step in and start to change or assist with some of the more transactional work procurement does today?
Yeah, that's a good question. For me, at the tactical level, the first thing we have to understand is that generative AI takes an input, which is natural language, right? So it's like you're talking to a machine. And how that translates in some very tactical things that I can do, for me, it's really around three main things. The first one is really about content generation, which is the core aspect where you're not taking too much risk, because being creative, you can allow your mind to go off a little bit on a tangent, and that's okay. It's part of the creative process. And things like generating an email template that you're going to send to all your suppliers to announce that you have a new event, a new forum, a new policy, or a change in your policy, and you're trying to get started in writing it with a given tone, a given style. Generative AI is great at that.
Yeah.
And will help a content owner or someone who would want to manage the messaging across all the suppliers to work a lot faster. And maybe there is, depending on the type of supplier, you will use a certain tone or a different tone, and so on, right? So that's an easy one. We've also built an out-of-the-box capability that allows category managers and buyers to, when they create a sourcing event where they will do and ask suppliers to do an RFP, request for a proposal or request for quote, to have the generative AI, our assistant, we call it Eva, intelligent virtual assistant, the Ivalua intelligent virtual assistant, to guide the category manager in describing what they need in a very clear and unambiguous way, so that to avoid a lot of back and forth with suppliers as to what do you mean by this, what do you mean by that, but also to embed in the way they describe their process, the process they will follow to receive proposals, to evaluate them, to award proposals, to follow best practices. And so you can bake those best practices in our assistant Eva, and have Eva help you and guide you with a set of questions to ensure that you've written it in a following best practices and in a clear and unambiguous way. But you can go further than that. I mentioned earlier that you can combine, for example, internet search with a large language model or generative AI, and being able to leverage the internet to, for example, do category market intelligence on, I'm trying to get smarter about aluminum as a category, or coffee, because it's part of my procurement strategy, or paper, and then searching the internet for news, events, and then asking the large language model to take those search results and make sense of them or combine them and create a specific report for me. That's a good example of another piece of work. And maybe a last one, which is really helping me with contract, for example, in either rewriting a clause in a contract, or even summarizing the content of a document, of a contractual document, highlighting some of the key terms, some of the risks, so that as an approver, if I'm in the workflow to review and approve that agreement, then I can have a very quick view at a glance of what's contained in that 60-page document that I don't necessarily want or have time to read now, but I can at least get a quick glimpse at it.
So it sounds like what you're saying is that so far we're seeing generative AI step in maybe with repetitive content creation help. So you talked about sending emails out to all of the suppliers. And so in some ways it will make us more efficient. But on a different level, it's starting to change how we think, isn't it? You talked about the creativity and the prompts and making things unambiguously clear. You can certainly see where being able to improve the way we write a spec or the way that we document requirements and getting feedback that can be simplified or standardized would benefit suppliers, which therefore benefits us again, because we're getting clearer, more comparable responses back from them. Are those the major ways that you're seeing it start to change the way procurement works?
Well, I think it's the beginning.
Yeah.
And it's very interesting because just a few days ago, I was toying with a new ways to write spec, as you mentioned. But in this case, it was intake management. It was giving the generative AI model an objective. And in this case, if you're going to be on the receiving end of an intake, you want to make sure that I understand what you need and I can procure it. I understand what type of product, services, why, any timeline, budget, and so on. And so it was very interesting to kind of give a large language model some very simple direction, saying, here's the objective that you have. Now, if the input you got from an end user meets that objective, you got everything you needed, great, you're done. But if it doesn't, ask me questions and try to elicit the right information from that person. And then you can enter in a loop kind of conversation where the generative AI agent will just do it and ask questions that were never even codified before. It will just create those questions as a support assistant, right? So now it's getting a little bit more interesting, where with very little configuration, very little setup, you can get something that goes a lot further in intelligently asking you questions. But what we're seeing is that those types of assistants, because can be very generalized, and that's what we mean by, which is for me the next level, which is really configuration assistance, which is the ability to, instead of having a drag and drop and a user interface where I create my workflow, just saying, my first step is such and such. My second step will be that. It will be, I will add those types of user profiles as approvers in that flow. Only add them if the budget is above a certain threshold. So you just talk, and the system in the back understands what you're saying and builds that workflow for you, right? So I think we are getting to the space where that area where generative AI can be a great guide to accelerate more strategic and deeper things that happen at the database level, including some reasoning, following just a simple way, natural language processing way, or natural language way to express what you need.
And that would certainly change the procurement user experience as well. I mean, procurement software is not perfect, but it's come a long way. It used to be that you would have to drag stakeholders through horrible multi-day training sessions before they could use it. And then somewhere along the way, I think because consumer expectations went up and digital literacy went up, the technology followed suit, right? And it became more intuitive, less training required. If we're getting to the point where we can communicate verbally with technology, that removes yet another barrier in terms of training people, which hopefully means that implementations will go more easily.
Yeah, it's a fascinating area at the intersection, I think, of UX, user interaction, and AI. If you think about enterprise software, for many years we had complex screens with a lot of fields that you have to fill out. And then there was a lot of trending around how do I make that UX more elegant? What are the best patterns in design? Don't make me think as an end user. And then there were the digital adoption platform, those platforms that guide you through the page and tell you, start here, fill out this text, and then select something here, and then with little bubble, and it feels like you're being assisted through the screen. Yeah. Now we're talking about even saying just what you need to an assistant, and he will do it for you. In fact, it's going further than that, because a lot of the models of replicating sound are now turning text to speech and speech to text, and that means that we will be releasing at some point, and I will announce that at Ivalua now, Eva Voice, which is this ability to do everything that I mentioned by just saying vocal commands and getting Eva to have the voice that you prefer to interact with, to do it for you. So you could be in your car and saying things like, hey, Eva, tell me how many of my contracts are currently pending approval from suppliers and which one. And Eva will search through the database and find those contracts and tell you, yes, you have a statement of work pending approval from this supplier, and you have an NDA, pending review by that other supplier. Or it could be about asking about amount of budget above a certain compliance level, and so on. So I think that interaction will become really interesting in the next few years as we use visual. I think vocal. I think it might actually become visual at some point with the camera turned on and being able to interpret, what I was mentioning earlier, which is visual cues as to how you speak and and beyond just what you say or text or type. So it's going to be interesting. Interesting.
Now, I'd like to have you leave listeners and viewers with a bit of advice. So if we have someone that is eager to get in on the ground floor and start actually experimenting with and applying generative AI, or a procurement team that's maybe being pushed to do so before they feel completely ready, where do you advise that people start? What's a good first step to take towards being able to experiment with generative AI in the context of procurement?
So it's a good question, and I think you need a little bit of help, because before answering your question, I think there is 3 barriers for me in my head as to what makes it difficult. One is a bit of being intimidated by the technology, and we talked about that. The second one is a little bit of doubt around security, like, am I sending my information to a third party? This is confidential information. I'm sharing way too much of what I should share with someone that I can't really put a face on them. I don't know who they are. Where is my information going? Are they going to use it to train another large language model? Will it be shared with my competitors? And then there's the third aspect, which is, can I truly believe the answer I'm getting? People talk about hallucination. They talk about it's a probabilistic model. It will make mistakes. And so I think you have to overcome first those 3 things. And if you like technology, then you can build yourself some level of confidence around the fact that it's not perfect, it's a tool, and therefore, you have to get started and use it. I think there's a lot of work going on right now in the industry to ensure that large language models are more specific, more precise, more repeatable in their answer. Not completely deterministic, but at least more repeatable, and minimize hallucinations where they start wandering off a path and creating new content that did not exist before, and then claiming it's real, right? So I think there's a lot of work, and it will take a little bit of time over the next year, 2 years, to get to a point where we have minimized all of that. From a security perspective, I think companies like Microsoft are doing the right thing of providing in their policies a lot of clarity as to the fact that data that is sent will not be used for training, will not be stored, will not be shared with anyone else. It's only used to serve the purpose of a request that you're making to an OpenAI service running on Microsoft Azure, for example. And so, it took, how long? It took maybe 15 years for companies to move off on-premise to the cloud. I think it will take 2 to 3 years for companies to start moving to kind of using within some guidelines, but there's a trust factor. So I think to answer your question is, one, you need to work with your executive team to get a little bit of the mandate. So if the executive team is not clear on their strategy and the mandate that they're giving their employees, then it's very hard for someone to go and explore. I think executive teams have to be very clear on the mandate. It doesn't mean that they're giving them free rein to do whatever they want. I think there is a level of information security and due diligence that a CIO and his team needs to take to ensure that the service meets a number of security requirements. But that, I think, is a parallel aspect. After that, I think it's more about not being too intimidated and just getting started. And that's why in our platform, we've provided a number of pre-baked use cases that are just starting point. And the idea is, okay, those 9 use cases are great. An example is writing an email to supplier. Another example is summarizing a contract. And a third example, for example, is turning a supplier evaluation questionnaire into a performance improvement plan. Right? It's helped me highlight what's weak or what's challenged, the supplier is challenged with, and turn that into an improvement plan. Right? So we build those not just because we feel there is a lot of value, but beyond that, they provide good starters, right? Examples where, as you start looking at what it does, how it leverages a file, a piece of information in the platform, now you get some ideas and you say, what about this? What about that? And that's the creative process we're trying to create with our partners, with our customers, and definitely at Ivalua with our employees.
Well, Pascal, this has been a fascinating conversation, as I said when we started, about a very hot topic. If people have heard our conversation or watched our conversation today and would like to get in touch with you directly, what is the best way for them to reach out?
So I'm pretty accessible. They can reach out via my email address, via our marketing team, our product marketing team, and our customers, our partners have their own contact within Ivalua, and they know, and all of them know how to find me. so at the end of the day, the information comes back to me in one sense. But again, at the end of the day, generative AI is a society, enterprise-wide thing. And our goal, and my goal with our CEO, is to make sure that everybody within Ivalua is able to talk about what we're doing, what can be done, and feel comfortable with generative AI at their level, right?
Excellent. Well, Pascal, thank you so much for being with us today.
Thank you very much, Katie, for having me.